the city of Berlin, now almost completely hidden by trees, there's a structure unlike any other in the world. And while I tell you about it, I'm gonna sew this apron. Let's go.
It looks really just like a concrete block, because that's precisely what it is. The Schwerbelastungskörper, the heavy load-bearing or load-exerting body, a weird testament to dreams of world domination. It's hard to describe because it's unique in the world. Big, heavy, about the size of a 4-story building. Berliners call it by many names: the cylinder, the mushroom, or most directly, the Nazi block, Nazi clots. Its fame isn't its own, it's because of who built it. This monument to questionable projects, it's actually the only tangible remnant of Hitler's most ambitious architectural project, Germania. In the 1920s, long before coming to power, the would-be artist drew sketches of monumental buildings to compensate for his artistic failures with the power of the state. Buildings and an entire city, a new Berlin, his Germania. We tend to think about them only during the war, but let's remember that the Nazis had already been in power for several years. Hitler was appointed Chancellor of Germany in 1933, and around a year later, the Nazi Party had dismantled the Weimar Republic's democratic institutions, turning Germany into a totalitarian state through laws like his Enabling Act. This means that by the time World War II broke out in 1939, Nazi rule had already reshaped German society. Censorship, propaganda, persecution of minorities, and the normalization of an ideology that would soon plunge the world into catastrophe were martially underway. For Hitler, architecture wasn't just about building. In Mein Kampf, he dedicated entire pages to explaining its importance. Architecture was propaganda set in stone, words rendered as monuments, a direct appeal to emotions. Idolizing ancient Rome, Hitler believed that great empires expressed their might in their monuments. And he wanted monuments to embody the Volksgemeinschaft, the people's community, unified racially and spiritually, where all pure-blood Germans would be subordinated to the good of the people and the state. But the danger of any unification concept is that it never includes everyone. A comedian once said about Greek democracy, "Just so you know, the people have never ruled anything. Do you think any random person was the people in Greece? Women weren't included, nor children, nor artists, nor craftsmen, nor the poor, etc., etc." As always, tyrants need sycophants. Hitler found one of his in Albert Speer. Speer was a young and talented architect, but he had another talent: always being there whenever Hitler visited construction works or architectural exhibitions. He was there to learn what Hitler wanted to see. When Troost, Hitler's main architect, died in 1934, Speer was ready to take his place. In 1937, Hitler gave him a simple task: to totally redesign Berlin as the most impressive capital the world would ever see. Because nothing says secure leadership like destroying your own capital. Speer had to create the capital of the global Reich. It wasn't to be just Berlin, it would be Welthauptstadt Germania, World Capital Germania. The plan included the Great Arch, a triumphal arch that would make Paris's Arc de Triomphe look like a toy. Hitler's version would be 117 meters high and 170 meters wide, around 35 stories tall. large enough for the Paris Arch to fit inside it. Consider this. As of 2025, the largest triumphal arch ever built is the Monumento a la Revolución, Monument to the Revolution, in Mexico City, 67 meters tall. The Great Arch was to be almost twice as high. Subtlety was never a Nazi strength. The dictator had a list of 5 Führer cities for different purposes which he would completely transform: Berlin, Nuremberg, Hamburg, Linz, and Munich. And Berlin would be the capital of the Greater Germanic Reich. But Hitler didn't particularly like Berlin. It was important being the capital of the country and all, but under the Weimar Republic it had been too progressive, too decadent for his liking. Plus, aesthetically, he disliked its mishmash of architectural styles. It had to be rebuilt into Welthauptstadt Germania, whether Berliners wanted it or not. Stylistically, it would be Roman, neoclassical. Buildings would be monumental, gigantic, brutal. Hitler's plan was, honestly, very simple: completely demolish Berlin's city center and rebuild it. At its core would be the Volkshalle, the People's Hall, a domed structure 290 meters tall, able to hold between 180 and 200,000 people. With an 88-story copper dome, it would be the city's defining feature, inspired by Rome's Pantheon, but at a scale never seen before. Inside the Volkshalle, the breath of those 200,000 people could literally create its own weather, clouds made from human condensation, which would then maybe rain over the Nazi faithful. Not very glamorous. 2 massive boulevards would cross the city, designed for giant military parades where no traffic light would ever interrupt the spectacle. Nothing says efficient urban planning like prioritizing parade routes over actual traffic. The north-south axis would be 7 kilometers long and 120 meters wide, the Avenue of Splendors, ending with that huge triumphal arch as Germania's southern gate. The east-west axis was partially built. To this day, you can see sections, like the relocated Victory Column and Speer's distinct streetlights. Speer was obsessed, not with practical criteria, but with what buildings signaled, how they intimidated, and, most disturbingly, how they would die. Ruinenwert theory, the theory of ruin value. Speer developed this. Reich buildings should be constructed with their legacy as ruins in mind. Dead buildings would become majestic ruins in millennia, like every great empire left behind. By avoiding quickly eroding modern materials, those ruins would project power and racism into the future. This was planning the eternity of Nazi ideology in stone. But as with everything Nazi, the story quickly turns grim. This wasn't just architectural megalomania. It was genocide with blueprints. The Germania project was a secret because 50,000 to 100,000 houses would have to be demolished in a Berlin already suffering from a housing shortage. Hitler planned to use Jewish forced labor for Germania's construction, while simultaneously evicting them from their homes. Construction would proceed with forced labor and concentration camp prisoners. Quarries for materials were located near concentration camps. Urban planning with a body count. Besides the many ethical and moral ones, there was one small practical problem with Hitler's grand vision. Berlin is built on swampy, sandy soil. In fact, the very name Berlin is related to words meaning wasteland or marsh, not exactly the ideal foundation, for the world's heaviest buildings. Triumphal arches were invented by the Romans to commemorate significant historical events. They can now be found throughout Europe and all over the world, from New York to Pyongyang, but Germania's would be by far the largest in history. It was especially tricky, as its huge weight would rest on 4 massive pillars. German engineers were, to their credit, competent and proactive, anticipating major problems. Their elegantly simple, very German-like solution: build a test structure to simulate the precise weight of one of the pillars. Enter the Schwerbelastungskörper, designed to collect data about soil behavior under extreme loads. Its name means literally heavy load exerting body, but Berliners tend to call it the Nazi block. In 1941, construction started, with the giant concrete cylinder being built by French POWs, forced to build a test bed for their oppressors' most grandiose monument. The finished structure was a marvel of precision engineering applied to an absurd idea. The visible cylinder is 14 meters tall and 21 meters in diameter. But that's just the part you see. It plunges 18.2 meters into the ground, constructed on an 11-meter base that rests on solid glacial marl. It weighs 12,650 tons. In terms of ground pressure, it exerts more force per area than the Pyramid of Cheops does on Egyptian soil. Inside, there's something fascinating. A 1.5-meter observation chamber descending 18 meters underground for monitoring ground changes, measuring exactly how much the concrete monster sank. Today, it's closed for safety reasons, but for decades, scientists descended into that claustrophobic space to document the slow sinking of the Nazi dream into Berlin's mud. Construction finished in 1942, but by then everything had changed. World War II had begun in 1939, and Germany's priorities had shifted. Even Albert Speer had already moved on, from architect to Minister of Armaments and Munitions. Tests began immediately after construction. German engineers calculated that the structure should not sink more than 6 centimeters for the Triumphal Arch to be feasible. By the end of the war, the cylinder had sunk 19.5 centimeters, over 3 times the acceptable limit. The ground of Berlin was telling Hitler's architects what everyone else wanted to say: no. Sadly, Speer was also very good at his new job. Through propaganda, he marketed himself as the armaments miracle worker, claiming he multiplied munitions production by 6. He used his media gift to promote the war economy, silencing those who wanted an end to the war. And the reality was even darker. Speer kept the war effort going when he knew it was already lost. Each day the war dragged on, an average of 16,000 people died. Speer knew this and pressed on. He deliberately prolonged the war, ruthlessly mobilized slave labor, cut production quality to favor quantity, expanded Auschwitz and other camps. Hundreds of thousands of prisoners worked in his underground factories in conditions his own staff called hell. Absurdly, the Schwerbelastungskörper experiment didn't stop after Germany's defeat. The structure was too dangerous to demolish, situated near homes and railway lines. Blowing it up would have caused massive collateral damage. So, measurements continued. Civilian scientists resumed study after the war. As a test object, it proved advanced and useful. Data was gathered until 1977. Final results showed over 20 centimeters of sinking, 3.5 centimeters of tilt. Building Hitler's arch would have required a massive, possibly impossible, ground reinforcement. Berlin's soil gave its final verdict. Not happening. When no one had further questions for it, it was abandoned, growing increasingly derelict as the years went by. In 1945, at Nuremberg, Speer's charisma helped him once again. He posed as the repentant technocrat, the architect just doing his job. While others denied everything, Speer had a different strategy. Admit collective responsibility, deny specific knowledge of the Holocaust, take credit for good management, and shift all moral blame to Hitler. It kinda paid off. Speer received only 20 years in Spandau prison, while most other high-ranking Nazis went to the gallows. In prison, he wrote his autobiography, Inside the Third Reich, published in 1969. He painted himself as Hitler's architect, oddly blameless and full of remorse, a masterwork in image rehabilitation. When released in 1966, some even referred to him as the good Nazi, a myth he carefully constructed. His book became a bestseller, making him rich and famous, the repentant Nazi. It was all a lie. Later research showed that Speer knew about the Holocaust, visited concentration camps, and was fully aware of the slave labor that fueled his war machine. But by then, his myth was set. Eventually, Berlin authorities recognized the Schwerbelastungskörper's value as a historical lesson. In 1995, it was declared a national monument, a protected historical site. As the only tangible remnant of Nazi urban planning, it serves as a grim warning. Oddly, it was never meant to be permanent, so it's slowly and poetically crumbling, the sole relic of a lunatic's urban dream. Since 2009, there's been an information center on site. 3 plaques provide historical context. A viewing platform lets visitors experience the urban planning scale. A pavilion hosts seminars and youth projects. There are guided tours. It's a concrete reminder of how easily technical expertise can serve evil. By preserving it, Germany chose a permanent warning. Even precise engineering can have the darkest purposes. Some wish it wouldn't disappear because it's a useful embarrassment. Seeing a megalomaniac's plan reduced to just a sad concrete block is powerful. Its brutalism in stone utterly devoid of glory. As filmmakers Alexander Klug and Peter Chamonix warn in their 1961 documentary, Brutality in Stone, every structure left to us by history expresses the spirit of its builders, even if it's later used for other purposes. The abandoned buildings of the Nazi Party serve as witnesses in stone of a time that hosted the most terrible events in German history. End quote. But here's the thing. This ugly concrete cylinder is more than just a historical curiosity. It's an uncomfortably relevant red flag for today. Because even if we're no longer building giant concrete test blocks, the warning signs of fascism behind this monstrosity are sprouting worldwide like worms after rain. Fascism always appeals to a nostalgic, better past that never existed or was only better for a selected few. The return to an invented lost greatness. Today, we're seeing a worldwide resurgence. Scholars of modern fascism have identified the warning signs, and they're not subtle. Widespread nationalism? Check. Disdain for human rights? All too common. Enemy scapegoating as a binding force? Practically standard politics now. What's different is that today's would-be authoritarians don't need massive concrete monuments to intimidate. They have social media. Digital fascism is far more efficient than Hitler's architectural approach. Why build intimidating buildings when you can manipulate people through their smartphones? Today's fascists get the same psychological effects Hitler wanted from his monuments via algorithms and disinformation. Authoritarianism goes digital, more portable, more insidious, and infinitely more profitable than building concrete monsters. The truly depressing bit? It's working. All over the world, far-right movements gain ground with the same playbook Hitler used, only with better tech. They still promise to return their nation to greatness, still scapegoat minorities, still use fear and anger to bypass reason. The only difference is they do it via social media, not Nuremberg rallies. Speaking of monumental architecture as a symbol of power, in October 2025, President Trump proposed building a triumphal arch in Washington, D.C., opposite the Lincoln Memorial for the U.S.'s 250th anniversary. He called it the Independence Arch. Media called it the Trump Arch. When a reporter asked who it was for, Trump pointed at himself. For me, it'll be beautiful. History doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. And sometimes it rhymes in monumental concrete. The Schwerbelastungskörper is more than just a monument to Nazi arrogance. It's a 12,650-ton warning about what happens when societies stop paying attention to fascist red flags. It reminds us that the path to authoritarianism is paved with precise engineering, bureaucratic efficiency, and ordinary people's willingness to look away. The block is still sinking, vanishing slowly into Berlin's soil, somehow fitting. But its warning remains as relevant as ever. Because while Hitler's concrete dreams crumbled, the psychology behind them, the appeal to fear, the promise of easy solutions to hard problems, the militarization of nostalgia, those things are very much alive. Of all Speer's and Hitler's monumental plans, nothing was built and nothing remains, except one thing: the damn giant concrete block. In a world where fascism is going digital and warning signs are desperately blinking across continents, this ugly concrete block serves its most important function, reminding us that ignoring authoritarian warning signs is not just dangerous, it's potentially catastrophic. Physics had the last laugh on Hitler's architectural ambitions. Berlin's marshy soil proved mightier than all Nazi ideology. Let's hope democracy gets the last laugh. The alternative is a world where the Schwerbelastungskörper becomes not just a historical curiosity, but a preview of things to come.
The colors for the details were inspired by the golden and red of the Roman legions, because of the subject of this video. But in life, always remember to keep the good and drop the bad.